At noon on April 22nd, 1889, a pistol shot cracked across the Oklahoma prairie, and somewhere between 50 and 60,000 people surged forward into 2 million acres of land that, as of that morning, contained no city, no street, no well, and no building except a single wooden railroad depot called Oklahoma Station. By nightfall, more than 10,000 people were living there, not visiting, living. They had driven stakes, claimed lots, and begun arguing over who owned what. Within a week, they had elected a mayor. Within a month, they had a board of trade. Within 2 years, they had an opera house. No major city in the history of the Western Hemisphere appeared faster than Oklahoma City. It was not settled. It was instantiated all at once on flat red prairie by people who had nothing in common except the willingness to run. And here is the thing you have to understand about everything that followed. That single afternoon established the logic of the entire city. Oklahoma City has never waited for permission, never grown in an orderly way, never developed according to some rational plan. It has lunged at every opportunity the way those first settlers lunged at the starting line. Sometimes the lunge was brilliant. Sometimes it was catastrophic. But the instinct was always the same: move first, figure it out later. And it produced a city unlike anything else in America, one that was built, destroyed, and rebuilt so many times that by the 21st century, nearly nothing of its original fabric remained, and yet the place was more alive than it had been in decades. The chaos of that first day was real. The lots that had been hastily surveyed by the Santa Fe Railroad were 25 feet wide, and men who had ridden hours on horseback were now standing nose to nose over a strip of dirt barely wider than a wagon, shoving legal claims at each other. Special boomer trains had been required to observe a speed limit, the pace of a horse, to keep things fair, but fairness was a fiction. The double-engine train from Purcell arrived at Oklahoma Station at 2:10 in the afternoon, looking, as one witness described it, like a giant centipede with hundreds of arms and legs and heads sticking out everywhere. People leapt from moving cars, sprinted into the dust, and drove stakes into the ground before they had any idea what they were claiming. And then there were the Sooners, settlers who had snuck across the line before noon, hiding in creek beds and behind scrub brush, staking the best claims before the gun ever fired. Some of the resulting disputes took years to resolve in court. A section of town immediately south of the tracks became known as Hell's Half Acre, 320 chaotic acres where saloons, gambling houses, and worse were operating within hours of the land run itself. The city's first newspaper, the Oklahoma Times, published its inaugural edition before the town had a single paved road. But the disorder masked something else, a ferocious commercial energy. People had come to Oklahoma City not because the land was good. It was marginal farming country, flat and wind-hammered, with the North Canadian River nearby, but too shallow and erratic to serve as a commercial waterway, but because the railroad was already there. Oklahoma Station sat on the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe line, and that made it a place where goods could move. From day one, this was a merchant's town, a speculator's town, a middleman's town. The land itself was almost beside the point. 2 days after the run, an Ohio businessman named Henry Overholser arrived. He was 43 years old, already wealthy from ventures in Kansas and Colorado, and he had done something that tells you everything about how he saw the world. Before the run even happened, he had arranged for 7 to 10 railroad cars full of prefabricated buildings and lumber to be waiting for him at Oklahoma Station. While other settlers were sleeping in tents and arguing over lots, Overholser was erecting 6 two-story commercial buildings on Grand Avenue, the street that would become the spine of downtown. Within a month of his arrival, he was elected president of the Board of Trade, the predecessor to the Chamber of Commerce. His listing in the city directory would eventually read, with magnificent simplicity, Overholser, H. Capitalist. That listing was accurate. Over the next 15 years, Overholser did more than any single person to turn a tent settlement into a functioning city. He built the Grand Avenue Hotel in 1889, the year of the run itself. He erected the Overholser Opera House on Grand Avenue in 1903, a $108,000 confection that gave Oklahoma City's first generation, the 89ers, as they called themselves, a place to hear music and see theater and feel for an evening like they lived in a real city rather than a collection of wooden storefronts in the middle of Indian Territory. He invested in a streetcar company. He put money into banks. He ran for mayor in November 1889, barely 6 months after the city existed, and lost by 14 votes, which bothered him less than you might expect, because he had already decided that building the city was more important than governing it. Most critically, in 1895, he and a partner named C.G. Jones organized the St. Louis and Oklahoma City Railroad, which began service in 1898 and linked the city to Tulsa, Kansas City, and St. Louis via the Frisco Line. Before Overholser's railroad, Oklahoma City had one rail connection. After it, the city was a junction, and a junction could grow. In 1903, Overholser built a 20-room Victorian mansion on 3 lots in what is now the Heritage Hills neighborhood, a massive brick and stone house on empty land, with nothing around it but prairie and ambition. The lavish opening in the spring of 1904 was the social event of the season, and the house still stands today at 405 Northwest 15th Street, one of the only connections Oklahoma City has left to its founding generation, and grow it did. The 1890 census, taken a year after the run, counted just over 4,000 people. Many of the original settlers had left after finding the reality of prairie life less romantic than the idea of it. But by 1900, the population had tripled to more than 10,000. By 1907, the year Oklahoma became a state, the city was expanding so quickly that it was already chafing against its assigned role. The Federal Enabling Act of 1906 had designated Guthrie, a city 30 miles to the north that had been founded on the same day as Oklahoma City, as the state capital, and the law said it would remain so until at least 1913. Oklahoma City's boosters found this intolerable. What happened next was, depending on your sympathies, either a masterful act of political will or one of the most brazen thefts in American political history. On June 11, 1910, Governor Charles Haskell, Oklahoma's first governor, a man who openly described Guthrie as a Republican nest, called a statewide election to choose a permanent capital. The options were Oklahoma City, Guthrie, and Shawnee. Oklahoma City won overwhelmingly, 96,261 votes to Guthrie's 31,301, but Haskell did not wait for the results to be certified. At the stroke of midnight on June 12th, he signed a document declaring that the capital was now in Oklahoma City, and he ordered the state seal smuggled out of Guthrie. The seal was wrapped in a dirty shirt to disguise it, spirited past sheriff's deputies who had been posted to prevent exactly this, and driven 30 miles south to the Huckins Hotel in Oklahoma City in what newspapers described as a wild automobile ride. The Logan County Sheriff, who had tried to stop the removal, was arrested by the state militia on Haskell's orders, disarmed, and thrown in jail. Guthrie filed lawsuits. The case went all the way to the United States Supreme Court. Oklahoma City won. It always won these fights, not because it was right. The Enabling Act clearly said Guthrie should remain the capital until 1913, but because it was bigger, louder, and more politically connected. The lesson was not lost on the city. If you want something badly enough, take it and dare the lawyers to catch up. Now the city needed a Capitol building. The legislature authorized $1.5 million for its construction, and the state hired an architect named Solomon Andrew Layton to design it. Layton was becoming the most important architect in Oklahoma. He had already designed or would go on to design dozens of the state's most significant buildings, and he drew up plans for a handsome neoclassical structure in Indiana limestone and pink granite, crowned with a dome in the classical tradition. Construction began on July 20th, 1914, but the $1.5 million proved insufficient almost immediately. The additional $250,000 needed for the dome was impossible to justify as World War I consumed materials and attention, and when the building was completed on June 30th, 1917, the dome had been omitted. The building was designed to support one. Layton had made sure the foundations could bear the weight, but nobody could afford to build it. It would remain domeless for 85 years. For most of a century, the Oklahoma State Capitol sat on Northeast 23rd Street, looking like a building that had been interrupted mid-sentence, a government house with a flat roof where a crown should have been. It was, in its way, the perfect symbol for Oklahoma City itself, ambitious beyond its means. perpetually unfinished, always intending to add the last piece when the money came. That same architect, Solomon Layton, had another commission running concurrently. A Michigan-born oilman named William Balser Skirvin had acquired land in Oklahoma City during the 1889 land run and had been waiting, with a speculator's patience, for the right moment to develop it. By 1909, when a New York investor approached Skirvin with an offer to buy his holdings and build a hotel, Skirvin decided he'd build one himself. He hired Layton, and the two of them planned a 6-story, U-shaped hotel. But as the 5th story neared completion in 1910, Layton convinced Skirvin that the city was growing fast enough to justify 10 stories instead of 6. On September 26, 1911, the Skirvin Hotel opened to the public with 224 rooms, an English Gothic lobby, Austrian chandeliers, a ballroom that seated 500, a cafe, a drugstore, and one of the first air conditioning systems in the state, then called iced air. It was the largest hotel in the Southwest. The cost, depending on which source you trust, was somewhere between $500,000 and $1.8 million, a range that itself tells you something about how casually money was counted in early Oklahoma City. The Skirvin became the center of everything. Politicians made deals in its lobby. Oilmen negotiated leases in its suites. Skirvin's daughter, Pearl, grew up attending events at the hotel and would later become Pearl Mesta, the famous Washington hostess and eventual U.S. ambassador to Luxembourg, a trajectory that began in a hotel dining room in a city that hadn't existed when her father was born. The Skirvin hosted presidents, movie stars, and, according to reliable rumor, a great deal of illegal gambling and bootlegging conducted through underground tunnels during Prohibition. It was, for decades, the building that announced Oklahoma City's ambition to the world. "We are not a cow town," the Skirvin said. "We are a place where business happens." In 1958, a young NAACP leader named Clara Looper staged a sit-in at the Skirvin's lunch counter, and the hotel integrated, the first in the state to do so. That, too, was an Oklahoma City gesture, not gradual, not reluctant, but immediate, because someone forced the question. Meanwhile, 2 blocks away, another piece of the skyline was being assembled. Charles Colcord, a man whose biography reads like a frontier novel compressed into a single life. Cattle rancher, U.S. Marshal, participant in 3 Oklahoma land runs, first police chief of Oklahoma City, had decided to build a skyscraper. Colcord had seen the devastation of the 1906 San Francisco earthquake and wanted his building to be fireproof, so he hired architect William Wells, a protege of Louis Sullivan, and commissioned the first steel-reinforced concrete structure in the state of Oklahoma. The 12-story Colcord building, completed in 1910 at 15 North Robinson, was the tallest building in Oklahoma when it opened. Among the laborers on its construction crew was a man named Lewis Ellison, whose son Ralph would grow up to write one of the great American novels. The elder Ellison had come to Oklahoma because the new state seemed to promise a kind of freedom that older places did not. And that promise, complicated, partial, and sometimes betrayed, ran through Oklahoma City's story as surely as the railroad tracks. So by 1917, Oklahoma City had its capital, its Grand Hotel, its first skyscraper, its opera house, its railroads, and a population approaching 90,000. It had arrived, by any reasonable standard, at the status of a real city. And then the ground beneath it turned out to be worth more than everything on top of it combined. On December 4, 1928, a drilling crew working for the Indian Territory Illuminating Oil Company punched through the Arbuckle limestone formation about 6 miles southeast of downtown. Gas pressure blew the tools out of the well. They had found the Oklahoma City oil field, one of the largest petroleum deposits in the United States, and it was directly beneath the city itself. Within months, derricks were sprouting in backyards, on vacant lots, along residential streets. The field eventually covered most of the city's southern half. Over the next 40 years, it would yield 733 million barrels of oil. The most spectacular moment came on March 26, 1930, when a well called Mary Sudick No. 1, named for the woman who owned the property, blew out of control. The drilling crew had underestimated the pressure in the newly discovered Wilcox Sand Formation, and when they punched into it at 6,471 feet, the well erupted. 20,000 barrels of oil and 200 million cubic feet of gas per day came screaming out of the ground. NBC Radio sent Floyd Gibbons to do daily broadcasts. Hollywood newsreel crews descended on the site. Wild Mary Sudick, as the gusher was instantly called, sprayed oil across the prairie for 11 days before it was capped on the third try. It was the most publicized oil well in the world that year, and when it was finally brought under control, it became the most productive well in the world in 1930. Approximately 211,000 barrels were recovered from the vicinity. As many as 800,000 barrels may have been lost. The money was staggering. The cumulative production from the Oklahoma City oil field would eventually exceed 1 billion barrels of oil equivalent, making it one of the world's giant petroleum fields. The field sustained Oklahoma City through the Great Depression at a time when cities without a resource base were collapsing, while farmers across Oklahoma were being blown off their land by dust storms and bank failures. While the state was hemorrhaging population to California, downtown Oklahoma City was putting up new buildings. The city's population nearly doubled between 1920 and 1930, from about 91,000 to more than 185,000, and it kept growing through the Depression decade, reaching over 204,000 by 1940. Oil didn't just enrich the city, it made the city legible to the outside world. Before oil, Oklahoma City was a railroad town on the prairie. After oil, it was a place that mattered to banks in New York, to equipment manufacturers in Houston, to speculators everywhere. The Skirvin expanded. Leighton designed additions that grew the hotel to 3 14-story wings and 525 rooms by 1928. W.B. Skirvin even announced plans for a 26-story tower across Broadway, though the Depression caught up with him on the 14th floor, and he had to stop construction for 2 years before finishing in 1934. The oil industry gave the city a recklessness that matched its founding temperament. Drill anywhere, build anything, worry about consequences later. Derricks went up so close to the state capitol that one well was slant drilled from across the street to reach oil sands directly beneath the building itself. A well called Petunia No. 1, drilled on the Capitol grounds in 1941, is still producing oil. The Oklahoma State Capitol remains the only state capitol in America with an active oil well on its grounds, which is either a point of pride or an absurdity, depending on how you look at it. Solomon Leighton's domeless building, designed to project dignity and permanence, spent decades surrounded by the noise and mess and jackpot energy of an oil field. Through the 1930s and 1940s, the city's growth was shaped by a man who, in any other place, might have been a music teacher. Stanley Draper was born on a farm in North Carolina, studied at Shenandoah University with the idea of becoming a choir director, and ended up in Oklahoma City in 1919 because someone offered him a job at the Chamber of Commerce. He didn't know what a Chamber of Commerce was when he accepted the position. He stayed for 49 years. During his tenure as managing director, the city's population quadrupled. Draper was the architect of a strategy that other cities found bewildering and slightly alarming: annexation on a massive scale. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, he engineered a series of land grabs that expanded Oklahoma City from about 80 square miles to more than 475 square miles, making it, briefly, the largest city by area in the United States. At one point, Draper floated the idea of annexing all the way to Tulsa, creating a single megalopolis across the state. It was, by any measure, a grandiose vision. It was also, in practical terms, a way to capture suburban tax revenue before it escaped into surrounding counties. Draper understood, perhaps better than any of his contemporaries, that a city's power depended on the size of its tax base. And if the people were moving outward, then the city limits would have to move outward faster. But Draper's most consequential act was not annexation, it was persuasion. In 1941, he convinced the War Department to locate the Midwest Air Depot, later Tinker Air Force Base, in Oklahoma City, and after the war, he secured the Civil Aeronautics Administration Center as well. Tinker became the city's largest employer. It brought tens of thousands of federal jobs, and with them, a stability that the oil industry, for all its wealth, could never provide. The oil could run out, and the price could crash. Tinker's payroll was backed by the United States government. It was the most important economic decision in the city's history, and it was made by a choir director from North Carolina. By the early 1960s, Oklahoma City's population had passed 300,000, and the downtown that the 89ers had built was showing its age. The lots staked out during the land run were 25 feet wide, too narrow for modern commerce. The streetcar system had been dismantled after the war. Parking was impossible. 53 downtown retailers had closed or moved to the suburbs by 1962. The city's business leaders, Dean McGee of Kerr-McGee Oil, publisher E.K. Gaylord, Stanley Draper at the Chamber, decided that what downtown needed was not renovation, but obliteration and replacement. They hired I.M. Pei, who had already designed urban renewal plans for Cleveland and Philadelphia to reimagine the entire central business district. On December 11, 1964, Pei unveiled his vision at a Chamber of Commerce luncheon in the Persian Room of the Skirvin Hotel, the very building that represented everything the old downtown had been. 600 people oohed and ahed, according to the next day's Daily Oklahoman, as Pei described a futuristic Oklahoma City as it would look in 1989, gleaming towers, planned open spaces, a modern shopping center at its core. The newspaper's coverage used words like transformation and facelift and redevelopment. It did not use the word demolition. But demolition was what happened. The City Council adopted the Pei Plan in September 1965, and by 1967, the wrecking balls were swinging. Over the next decade and a half, contractors hired by the Urban Renewal Authority leveled 447 buildings. Private owners tore down another 75. In total, more than 500 structures were destroyed across 220 acres between Northwest 6th and Interstate 40, from Chartel to the Santa Fe Railway. The Criterion Theater came down. The Hales Building came down. The Biltmore Hotel was imploded. Charles Colcord's own mansion, the one he had built in 1903 at 421 Northwest 13th Street, was demolished in 1965. Its destruction so senseless that it is credited with launching the historic preservation movement in Oklahoma City, though by then there was precious little left to preserve. James B. White, Jr., Executive Director of the Urban Renewal Authority from 1967 to 1980, dismissed the idea that any of these buildings mattered. "We are a new country," he said in a 1977 documentary. "We are a new state. When you're talking about one generation almost from its beginning, I get myself a little lost with the terminology of being historical." It was a remarkable statement. A man charged with reshaping a city arguing that the city had no history worth saving. And it captured the same impatient, burn-it-down-and-start-over instinct that had characterized Oklahoma City from the moment the starting gun fired in 1889. The difference was that in 1889, there was nothing to destroy. The Pei Plan was, at best, half completed. The shopping center that was supposed to be its centerpiece was never built. The residential towers were never built. The downtown apartment buildings that were supposed to bring people back to live in the core were never built. Federal funding for urban renewal dried up in the mid-1970s as the program fell out of political favor nationally. What remained was a downtown full of holes, vacant lots where buildings had stood, surface parking lots where streets had been, and a handful of new towers. The Kerr-McGee headquarters, Liberty Tower, the Fidelity Bank building, rising from a landscape that felt less like a city center than an architectural showroom with nothing between the exhibits. The one project completed more or less as Pei intended was the myriad botanical gardens built on the site of the imploded Biltmore Hotel. The pedestrian life that had animated downtown since the 89ers was gone. The retail that had given people a reason to come downtown was gone. Even the railroad tracks had been moved to make way for the Civic Center, a choice that severed another connection between the city and its origins. The Pei Plan had promised Oklahoma City in 1989 would be one of the most beautiful cities in the Western Hemisphere. By 1989, it was one of the emptiest. And then the oil market collapsed. Throughout the late 1970s, Oklahoma City had been riding another boom. Oil prices peaked at around $40 a barrel in April 1981. And money was flowing through the city with the same reckless velocity it had shown in the 1930s. A small commercial bank called Penn Square Bank, located in the back of a suburban shopping mall, had become the epicenter of a spectacular lending spree. Penn Square made enormous, poorly underwritten loans to oil and gas operators and sold participations in those loans to major banks across the country. Continental Illinois in Chicago, Seafirst in Seattle, Chase Manhattan in New York. Between 1974 and 1982, Penn Square's assets ballooned from $29 million to $525 million. Its energy lending chief, Bill Patterson, was famous for drinking beer out of his cowboy boots at business meetings. When oil prices began to fall in 1981, the whole structure crumbled. Depositors pulled $50 million out of Penn Square in May 1982. On July 5th, the regulators spent the 4th of July weekend setting it up. The FDIC declared Penn Square insolvent. Uninsured deposits of $163 million were not paid. The ripple effects were extraordinary. Seafirst failed. Continental Illinois, which had participated in nearly $1 billion worth of Penn Square's loans, became the largest bank failure in American history to that point, and the entire Oklahoma banking system went into crisis. What had started as a single reckless bank in a shopping mall triggered a national financial chain reaction. Oil dropped from $40 to $10 a barrel over the next few years. Office vacancy rates in downtown Oklahoma City climbed past 30%. The construction cranes disappeared. The city lost an estimated 20,000 energy-related jobs. The Skirvin Hotel, its glory days long past, changed hands repeatedly, suffered through bankruptcy, and in 1988 closed its doors. Pigeons moved into the ballroom, where politicians and oilmen had once made deals over Austrian chandeliers. The most important building in Oklahoma City's history sat dark and empty, its windows broken, its lobby silent. Solomon Layton's masterwork, the man had been dead since 1943, but his buildings were still defining the city, had become a monument to the bust. By the early 1990s, downtown Oklahoma City was, by most measures, dead. The urban renewal that was supposed to create a modern city had produced a modern wasteland. The oil bust had emptied whatever the wrecking balls hadn't. You could, as Mayor Ron Norrick later put it, shoot a cannon down the street and not hit anybody. The humiliation became specific in 1991 when United Airlines chose Indianapolis over Oklahoma City for a new maintenance facility that would have brought 7,500 jobs. The reason, the airline reportedly explained, was that Indianapolis offered a higher quality of life. Oklahoma City, a state capital of more than 400,000 people, was being told, to its face, that it was not a place where people wanted to live. Norrick, who had become mayor in 1987, took it personally. While working on the city budget, he realized there was no money for maintenance on any of the publicly owned buildings: the convention center, the civic center music hall, the fairgrounds, let alone new construction. Standard municipal practice would have been to issue bonds, which meant taking on debt, which meant property tax increases, which in Oklahoma in the early 1990s was political suicide. Norrick came up with something different. He proposed a temporary 1-cent sales tax, a penny on every dollar, that would run for 5 years, raise money on a pay-as-you-go basis, incur zero debt, and fund a specific bundle of 9 projects: a new sports arena, a new ballpark, a canal through the old Bricktown Warehouse District, a new downtown library, renovations to the Convention Center and Civic Center Music Hall, improvements to the fairgrounds, the beginning of a streetcar system, and development along the North Canadian River. He called it the Metropolitan Area Projects, or MAPs. Early polling showed the plan was deeply unpopular. Individual projects scored as low as 20 or 30% approval. Norrick understood that if each project were voted on separately, most or all of them would fail. So he bundled them. Vote for the tax, and you get all 9. It was a gamble built on a gamble. The specific bet that voters would accept a package deal they'd reject piecemeal, and the larger bet that Oklahoma City's citizens cared enough about their own city to tax themselves for its future. During the campaign, Norrick went to civic meetings and told older voters, "Think about your kids and grandkids. Do you want them working in Dallas or Kansas City or St. Louis? Wouldn't you like them to stay in Oklahoma City?" It was an appeal to something deeper than economics. It was an appeal to pride, to the idea that a city exists because people choose it, and that choosing it means paying for it. On December 14, 1993, Maps passed with 54% of the vote, a slim margin. 1 month after polls showed it was still underwater. A lot of people just voted on faith, hoping it would work, Norrick said afterward. It worked. The temporary tax collected $309 million, including $54 million in interest. Every project was built on time and within budget. The Bricktown Ballpark opened for minor league baseball. The Bricktown Canal turned a derelict warehouse district into an entertainment and restaurant hub. The Ford Center, a 20,000-seat arena that would eventually be renamed the Paycom Center, rose on the edge of downtown, a building that had no tenant and no clear purpose beyond the conviction that if you built something big enough, someone would come. But before anyone came, something else happened. On the morning of April 19th, 1995, 16 months after Maps passed, while construction was still underway, a rented Ryder truck packed with nearly 5,000 pounds of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil detonated at 9:02 a.m. in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in downtown Oklahoma City. The blast destroyed a third of the 9-story structure, killed 168 people, including 19 children in the building's daycare center, injured more than 680 others, and damaged or destroyed 324 buildings in a 48-square block area. It was the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history. The bomber, Timothy McVeigh, had chosen Oklahoma City for reasons that had nothing to do with the city itself. He was targeting the federal government, and the Murrah Building housed offices of the ATF, the DEA, the Secret Service, the Social Security Administration, and other agencies. The city was collateral, but the aftermath was entirely local. The governor's office reported that 30 children were orphaned, 219 children lost at least one parent, 462 people were left homeless, and 7,000 people lost their workplace. The estimated property damage exceeded $652 million. What the bombing did to Oklahoma City's psyche is harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. The city had spent the previous year beginning tentatively to believe in its own revival. The Maps vote had been an act of civic faith, the first time in decades that the citizens of Oklahoma City had bet on themselves rather than waiting for oil prices or federal money to solve their problems. Now the downtown where that faith was being invested had a crater in it. The logic of despair would have been easy. The city was cursed, the investment was doomed, nothing good could take root here. That is not what happened. Norrick, who had been the face of Maps, became the face of the recovery. Steady, visible, and resolute. The Maps construction continued. The rebuilding continued. The Murrah site became the Oklahoma City National Memorial. 168 empty chairs arranged on a field of grass, one for each person killed, the smaller chairs representing the children. The memorial sits on what used to be 5th Street. The city convinced the municipal government to close the road permanently. Where traffic once passed, there is silence. In the years after the bombing, something shifted. Civic investment that had been tentative became determined. Maps was followed by Maps for Kids, which renovated the city's public schools. Maps 3 added Scissortail Park, a 70-acre public green space downtown, and a new convention center, and expanded the streetcar system. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina displaced the New Orleans Hornets, and the NBA temporarily relocated the team to Oklahoma City, where they played at the Ford Center, the arena that Maps had built with no tenant in mind. The city sold out almost every game. Just 10 days into that first season, NBA Commissioner David Stern declared Oklahoma City at the top of the list for any future expansion or relocation. It was the United Airlines rejection in reverse. A national institution looking at Oklahoma City and seeing for the first time a city worth investing in. The Hornets returned to New Orleans after 2 seasons, but the seed had been planted. In 2006, Oklahoma City businessman Clay Bennett purchased the Seattle Supersonics for $350 million. After failing to secure a new arena in Seattle and paying $75 million to break the team's lease, Bennett moved the franchise to Oklahoma City and renamed them the Thunder. They began play at the Ford Center in the 2008 to 2009 season. Within 2 years, the team had Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook, and within 4, they were in the NBA Finals. a city of about 580,000 people, one of the smallest NBA markets in the country, had willed professional sports into existence the same way it had willed railroads, oil, and a state capital, by moving first, building the infrastructure before anyone asked for it, and daring the opportunity to arrive. Since that first MAPS vote in 1993, Oklahoma City's residents have approved more than $2.8 billion in self-imposed investment through successive MAPS programs. The money has gone into arenas, parks, streetcars, schools, a convention center, senior wellness centers, trails, and river improvements. Everything paid in cash, no bonds, no debt. The city's population, which had been essentially flat through the 1980s, began climbing again, from about 444,000 in 1990 to more than 680,000 by 2020, making it the 22nd largest city in the country. It is, as a civic financing strategy, unlike anything else in America, and it works precisely because it echoes the logic of the land run. Put everything on the line, all at once, and run. The Skirvin Hotel reopened in 2007 after a $51 million renovation. It is now a Hilton property. 225 rooms, chandeliers restored, lobby rebuilt in the English Gothic that Solomon Layton specified nearly a century earlier. NBA teams stay there when they play the Thunder, and some players have reported encounters with a ghost on the upper floors, a story that would probably have delighted W.B. Skirvin, who understood that a hotel needs a little mythology. The Colcord building, Charles Colcord's fireproof skyscraper, was converted into a boutique hotel in 2006. The reinforced concrete that Colcord insisted upon after studying the San Francisco earthquake held up for nearly a century without significant structural work, which is more than you can say for most of the predictions made about Oklahoma City's future. In 2002, 85 years after Solomon Layton's Capitol was completed without its dome, construction workers began the $21 million project to finish what Layton had designed. The original dome would have cost $250,000. By 2002, the price was 84 times that, but money, for once, was not the problem. Private funds were raised, the dome was built, and on November 16, 2002, Oklahoma's 95th birthday, the structure was dedicated. On top of it, instead of the eagle or figure of freedom that most state capitals feature, the builders placed a 17-foot bronze statue called the Guardian, designed by Enoch Kelly Haney, a state senator and artist of Seminole heritage. The statue is a Native American warrior, a choice that acknowledged something the land-run mythology had always left out. Traditional tribal blessings and dances from Cheyenne and Cheyenne Arapaho chiefs marked the installation. Oklahoma became the first state to have a Native American sculpture crowning its Capitol dome. Below the dome, on the south lawn, Petunia No. 1 continues to pump oil from beneath the Capitol grounds, as it has since 1941. Across the street, the historical marker for the Oklahoma City oil field still records the statistics. 733 million barrels in 40 years, 8th largest field in the nation, the origin of Wild Mary Sudic and the world's most publicized gusher. The Skirvin sits 6 blocks south, restored and occupied. The Colcord stands on Robinson Avenue, still the tallest thing William Wells ever built in this city. The Land Run Monument in Bricktown, 45 bronze figures, each 1.5 times life size, frozen in mid-gallop, occupies a canal bank that in 1993 was a derelict warehouse loading dock. The lots are still 25 feet wide. If you walk downtown today and look at the property lines, you can see it, the original survey. The stakes driven into the dirt by men who had been standing on empty prairie that morning. The buildings change. They always have in Oklahoma City. They go up in a frenzy of ambition and come down in a frenzy of reinvention, and the gaps between them fill slowly or quickly or not at all, depending on whether the oil is flowing, the tax is funding, the next MAPS vote is passing. But the lots are the same. The grid is the same. The flat horizon in every direction is the same. And somewhere underneath all of it, the asphalt, the foundations, the fiber optic cable, the land is the same land that 50,000 people ran toward on an April afternoon, not because it was promised to them, not because it was destined for greatness, but because a gun went off and they moved.